You know, at first, it was such a critical position that I was in. All I could think was, I've got to get to my doctors. You know, I can't breathe, I can't swallow, something horrible is happening.
How did you identify, or come to identify, that it was mold?
Well, after doing some of my research and trying to be my own advocate and informed, I went to my internist. And my internist said, well, what was your experience? What was that around? And I said, you know, the only link that I can think is it's something that I've ingested. And they said, well, what had you ingested around that time? And I thought, and suddenly I said, I was at the new house and I had lunch. I said, that's the only change in my environment that's been different than my day-to-day activities.
How do they finally make the diagnosis?
They made it on a differential basis, and I actually saw an infectious disease specialist. And they were able to determine, you know, through the history of some of my sensitivities that I had actually ingested penicillium, and that was the causative agent.
Wow.
It nearly took my life.
Wow.
Nearly took my life.
How does Expedient now come into the picture? What happened there?
Well, through my research and trying to get to the bottom line, I read an article actually in the paper that was showcasing Expedient and their mold remediation. So I got a hold of Rich on the phone, and Rich said, well, I need to come out and I need to take a look. And he has such an educated eye that he was able to take me throughout that home and show me the fur, you know, the mold fur throughout the entire basement and how it was actually moving from the basement.
Didn't you have the home inspected?
Even with the county health department, all they need to do is eradicate visual mold. And unless you've had it tested, you don't know what you're dealing with.
Whoa, that is really scary. What happened there, Richard?
Well, basically at her structure, you know, she had some kind of either predisposition to it, or there was enough there over a period of time to break her body down. Okay? And types, again, are very important. You have to determine what you're dealing with. Scientific, systematic approach. Check it out, figure out where it came from, how to deal with that, figure out how much you have, and then the type gives you a scenario in which to follow to remediate for.
And what's interesting is that if she wasn't sufficiently cognizant of what was going on, we wouldn't have had an interview with Melody Winsome, because Melody Winsome was on her way out the door, frankly. I mean, that may be a somewhat coarse way to put it, but she was in jeopardy.
It's not that coarse. There was an outbreak, they called the Cleveland outbreak, several years ago, where they were having some infants die, which they had originally attributed to sudden infant death syndrome. However, later studies showed that they had pulmonary hemorrhaging, which was a result of a mold called Stachybotrys.
Well, what about Legionnaire's disease? There's a classic example.
Absolutely.
You hear about these situations that occur on cruise ships where all of a sudden 15–20% of the passengers and the crew get ill. Those are all mold related, are they not, really?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, there is some kind of either bacterial, fungal, you know, mold is in the fungi kingdom, okay? Mold, mildew, it's all the same. Yeah, it all has an impact, and how your body deals with it is very important.
What can we do about it?
Well, first and foremost, in reference to doing something about it, you need to have me out to take a look, okay? Because eliminating the conditions...
Should I have you out to take a look even if I'm not having symptoms and even if I don't think I have mold?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because you're dealing with something that is microscopic, between 2 and 80 microns in size. That's 1/100th the width of your hair. You cannot see it. It can be a silent killer, so to speak. And again, not to be too rough with the verbiage, but there's been very many cases documented where the outcome was not nice.
What about that woman in Texas?
Melinda Ballard, absolutely. Yeah. She lost not only her husband's brain, so to speak, he suffering from early Alzheimer's, her son's asthmatic conditions, but her health impacted, and her entire structure was not livable.
Does it necessarily follow that, is there an acceptable level of mold that I can have in my house without needing remediation? Because people have this vision of, oh, if I invite these people out, they're going to tell me I have mold, they're going to start to come in there and rip out the drywall and so on and so forth. It's going to be awful. It's going to cost me $25,000.
No, absolutely. There are definitely levels by which are acceptable for normal cleaning practices. I go out to many homes, do an inspection, sometimes take samples there, sometimes get the samples back, go ahead, Alan, have at it. Clean it up whatever way you see fit. Just eliminate the conditions conducive. That does happen. Does it happen all the time? No, unfortunately, there are some homes that do require our attention.
When we come back, we're going to be talking with Bob Newkirk, who is one of the premier home inspectors in this area. And if you think that what we're talking about right here can cause some problems, wait to hear what Bob has to say.
Beware the mold monster. He can ruin your home, property, and your health. Want to know if the mold monster is living with you? Call Expedient Environmental, and for $99, we'll send one of our expert mold specialists to investigate. If there's mold, Expedient has the tools, knowledge, and experience to stop the damage and get rid of the mold monster. Go to our website for more info or call 845-229-1437 for your mold inspection appointment. This message brought to you by Expedient Environmental, your best defense against the mold monster.
We're going to spend a few minutes with Bob Newkirk talking about a process. If you're a buyer of a home, if you don't use a service like Bob's or use Bob's service, frankly, you're daft. You must get a home inspection, and that's what Bob does. He's an expert home inspector and recognized as such. Bob, Melody Winsome did not buy the house where she became sick with the penicillin.
Yes,
But
that's true.
that was a little house. You told me a story off camera that could bring tears to the eyes of a realtor.
Yes, indeed. It was a house in Westchester County where it had an indoor pool. And the indoor pool gives off vapor and moisture and then settles into the beam construction. This particular pool was encased in a room of wood. The total ceiling, the walls, everything was wood. So up in and above this particular room was a lack of insulation and lack of ventilation. So mold and the moisture
Now here's a house
tended to grow here.
Here's a house that is in contract for sale.
Yes.
And Bob is called in by the buyer to do
Yes.
the home inspection, and what do you find?
And I find mold growth in this ceiling area, which is really an attic space above the pool. And it had actually migrated into and above the kitchen and living room of that property also.
There's a happy
So-
ending to this story because you did what?
I took samples, and they were off to the lab for analysis. When they returned, I found that we had Penicillium aspergillus there. I referred this process over to remediation, and it happened to be Expedient Environmental who was called in to further examine the property and to perform a remediation there. And I believe he did.
Yes, you did.
The people who were originally going to purchase this property decided not to.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
They
I wasn't
decided
aware of that.
not to because they were concerned that there would be a reoccurrence.
There goes another $8 million sale down
Yes.
the drain. By my calculations, a realtor is losing $480,000 on something like that. That's
Absolutely.
a big number. You don't want to lose too many of those babies because they don't come along every day. And could it have been prevented? Yes. You know how? By having Rich and his company come in before. Because a lot of the contracts, a lot of the real estate contracts today now have that clause that requires the inspection to include mold. Isn't that right?
Yes. Now, it's usually, you see, there's no legislation that deals with mold. It's all a recommendation. So if you find it, then we recommend that you take certain steps to either sample it or remediate it. It's surprising how many people do not want to sample. They just understand they have mold, send me someone to clean it up.
Right.
So it's a catch-22 almost.